When you hear the word magic, what is the first thing that comes to mind? The idea of magic is nothing new to anime, being among the primary elements that breathe life into the fantasy genre itself. I think we are all familiar with how this construct is usually portrayed. Everyone's magical abilities are predetermined by their mana capacity at birth, meaning that some people are extraordinarily strong while others are reduced to background NPCs. Magic is split between the basic elements like water and fire, while spells are casted using verbal incantations, mediums like grimoires, or even silently if the user is adept enough. Although there isn't exactly a problem with this, the fact remains that the lack of explanations behind how the magic actually works makes such an interesting plot device feel flat and linear. Why do certain words, phrases, or symbols lead to this outcome? Does the length of the incantation matter? Are there any components that exist universally across all spells? Of course, it goes without saying that the rationale behind how magic functions isn't the main focus of every show, but it's still such a shame that something with so much potential is often reduced to just another part of the world. That said, there is one anime currently airing with a sophisticated system that breaks this mold, a show that sought to shed light onto the complex and precious nature of magic as a whole. The name of this masterpiece is Witch Hat Atelier. Witch Hat Atelier takes place in a fantasy world where magic is the cornerstone of its technology. From the Pegasus carriages used for transportation to the cleaning spells that purify local springs, much of the advancements made could be directly attributed to the work of magic. The ones responsible for such improvements are known as witches, an organization of people who are thought to be the only ones gifted enough to actually cast spells. These individuals are delegated the task of maintaining order in society, and they do so by protecting one dangerous secret: that everyone is capable of using magic. You see, magic in this world isn't predetermined by how much mana somebody has at birth. Rather, all the practice requires is conjuring ink, a writing utensil, and a surface to write on. That was literally it. Once you acquired the knowledge of basic symbols, you would pretty much be able to cast and innovate a variety of different spells on your own. Such freedom inevitably led to many brutal conflicts in the past, resulting in the formation of witches who would hide the techniques of magic from the outside world, establish the grounds for forbidden spells, and entrusted secrets only to those who swore to keep it hidden. Thus, in the present, anyone who isn't a witch is considered an outsider, and will have their memories erased in the event that they discover the truth behind how spellcasting actually works. The story then pans to a young girl named Coco, who worked as a dressmaker's assistant in her mother's workshop. Even as a child, Coco was always fond of magic after having acquired a strange book and wand from a mysterious masked figure, prompting her to set her sights on becoming a witch one day. However, there was one main issue with this dream, and that was the fact that she was an outsider. Hence, she was also brainwashed into thinking that magic was only a luxury for those who were gifted, and that no matter how hard she tried, she was destined to be ordinary. Yet, this thought never killed her unwavering passion for magic, and she continued to dream that eventually she would be able to use it. One day, a Pegasus carriage carrying a group of people and a witch named Qifrey would come to her mother's workshop. It was during their time shopping that the carriage would become damaged, prompting Qifrey to voluntarily repair it by casting a spell. Although he tried to secretly redraw the glyph privately in the workshop, Coco couldn't refuse this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see a real magician at work, compelling her to sneak in through an entrance located on the rooftop. Through this, she would come to discover the secret technique behind magic, realizing that the wand she was given was actually a pen attached with conjuring ink, while the book contained a variety of different runes that could be used for various spells. As such, she proceeded to spend the rest of the night copying runes, beginning by recreating Qifrey's spell before trying a few she saw in the book. Then, she made a huge mistake. After discovering that she could compensate for her lack of drawing skills by tracing the symbols in the book, she accidentally conjured a forbidden spell, petrifying her home. While she was saved just in time by Qifrey, who had realized the dangers of the book, it was too late to save her mother, who had been petrified by the forbidden magic. Usually, an incident of this magnitude would result in Coco's memories being erased, but due to Qifrey's determination to find the correct organization that gave out the spellbook, known only as the Brimcaps, as well as his sympathy towards Coco's guilt for potentially killing her mom, Qifrey decided to take Coco in as a disciple, where she would learn the magic necessary to rescue her mom, while he used her memories as the sole lead to take down those from a bygone era. Coco would then find herself in Qifrey's atelier, meeting apprentices Tetia, Riche, and Agat, companions she would grow alongside to take responsibility for her actions. Alas, she was finally able to pursue her long-desired dream of magic, yet this dream came at a price that she could have never anticipated. Coco's situation was an unprecedented one, since it was practically unheard of for an outsider to be taken in as a witch's disciple, especially with their memories fully intact. But regardless of how it happened, she was still a witch's apprentice nonetheless, so she still had to uphold all the duties that was expected of one. Among her many responsibilities was, of course, to learn the rudiments of magic, providing us insight into how the process of witchcraft was really like through her perspective. In Witch Hat Atelier, the process of learning magic is akin to that of any other skill, requiring a set of techniques and a deep understanding of the fundamentals. Do you think an artist just picks up a pencil and draws a masterpiece right off the bat? How about a Michelin-star chef like Gordon Ramsay? Do you think he became a master cook in a few days? Like all things, magic takes several years of meticulous practice to become proficient, with repetition being the greatest method of improvement. Let's start with the basics. Magic spells consist of 3 fundamental components: a sigil, sign, and a ring that brings everything together. Beginning with the sigil, it typically resides at the center of the glyph, being indicative of the element that the spell represents. For instance, a fireball spell will contain a fire sigil, while a luminescent spell will use a light sigil. The types of elements include fire, water, air, earth, and light, which probably isn't too different from what you are already used to. The next layer of a rune has to do with something called a sign. These markings are usually oriented radially around the sigil, and they determine the form at which the spell will be manifested, whether that be its size or direction. Although it's customary to make all the signs identical for the sake of stability, asymmetrical signs can still make for valid spells, but just expect the outcome to be somewhat unpredictable. The final step of casting a spell involves something called a ring, a circle that encloses the sigil and signs. Every single spell in Witch Hat requires this ring to be completely closed off before it can be casted, so as long as the circle isn't completed, the spell will remain inactive. Witches take advantage of this knowledge to not only create unique inventions, but to also cater spells to certain situations. This is clearly evident through a piece of gear known as the sylph shoes, consisting of 2 semicircles on each shoe that could be manually combined by the user to grant flight. Another invention would be the teleportation device called a windowway, possessing a set of rings that can be rotated to match another window residing at a desired location. Rings can even be purposely left incomplete so that they could be drawn in at a moment's notice, like when a god shot a fireball spell at the dragon to help everyone escape. Rings are essentially the main component that allows for spell creativity in the world, giving magic the versatility it needs to be used to its fullest potential. Aside from these symbols, there are a few other factors that need to be addressed as well. For starters, drawing a larger seal will generally produce a stronger version of a spell than a smaller seal would. Tetia's Cloudbed spell perfectly illustrates this point, because when she drew a tiny seal, she could only make a cloud fort that fit a small number of people, but when they all decided to construct larger seals on the rooftops of the buildings in the area, they managed to summon a cloud that was large enough for even a dragon to sleep on. That being said, larger seals aren't always superior, and they definitely aren't the most optimal for every circumstance. After all, they take up a lot more conjuring ink than usual, and they are often far more difficult to draw well and in a timely manner. This brings me to my last point: neatness. Perhaps the most important part of a spell is how neatly it is drawn, since even slightly wobbly and uneven lines can greatly impede upon the stability and quality of the outcome. Take a look at all of Coco's initial spells. As you can see, a poorly drawn rune or even a slightly imperfect one can have lasting effects on how long and how well a spell functions. Even perfectly drawn spells can be ruined if the ink is smudged or slightly faded, like when Coco ruined a god's sylph shoes by cleaning them, or when Qifrey mentioned the pot of stew, whose seal constantly needed to be redrawn to preserve the quality of the food inside. In the end, the quality of magic is solely based on the skill of the user, forcing them to slowly refine their drawings through tedious repetition over prolonged periods of time. And with that, you now understand the basics of the magic system. Of course, there are more advanced signs and symbols that can be used for more grand spells, including things called repetition seals, but this is all you really need to know to get a feel for the magic's complexity. By combining a set of symbols in a certain manner, you are essentially able to come up with an endless number of interesting spells, and I feel like this sense of creativity and freedom isn't usually expressed in many other animes. This rare level of depth then helps to elucidate the beauty behind magic as a whole, making it seem more tangible and realistic. Think about it, even though our world will never be blessed with magic, if it were to hypothetically have it one day, there is a high probability that the magic would operate in the same way that it does in Witch Hat Atelier. It would be grounded in science rather than miracles, and it would most definitely be a practice viewed with an admiration that is similar to that of Coco's. Be honest, if magic suddenly became real one day, wouldn't you want to at least try it out? It's vibrant, flashy, and most of all, unfamiliar. But just like anything else you try for the first time, you don't think about how good you are at the start. Instead, you experiment and play around with things, hoping to discover new outcomes or pick up new skills as you go. Think about it like playing a new video game. At the beginning, you and your friends aren't fixated on being good because you aren't even experienced enough to recognize what being good means. This freedom then allows you to enjoy the game for what it is, doing stupid things just for the sake of it. That's the mentality that Coco adopted when she first became a witch. Even though she was slightly traumatized by the consequences of her forbidden spell, the fact remains that she still loved magic to her very core. To her, magic was precious, something so special that words couldn't do it justice. Now she was simply given another reason to explore her dream, not just because she wanted to, but because she had to. Prior to living in Qifrey's atelier, you could see the sparks of passion radiating from Coco's eyes as she copied the spells sloppily in her room. She didn't care that the spells were inadequate, fixating solely on the fact that she managed to conjure a spell for the first time. She also didn't rely on any guideline, using trial and error to unravel the intricacies of rune drawing. Then, when she eventually got to Qifrey's atelier, she was surrounded with even more unfamiliar instruments. Whether that be the strange vapor spell that pulled the moisture out of the air or the light spell that illuminated the stairwell, everything was a mixture of scary and interesting. Upon taking the data range test, Coco would learn to use the sylph shoes, admiring how amazing it felt to fly even if she was utterly atrocious at using them. Perhaps her greatest moment of growth occurred once she ruined the flight seals on the bottom of the sylph shoes, forcing her to improvise on the spot to complete the test. It was here that she would channel the skills that she built growing up alongside her mom, epiphanizing that her past experiences were valuable and that learning was not always a linear path. By evaluating her shortcomings, Coco was eventually able to formulate a makeshift sky soaring seal, applying what she learned from her mistakes to grant her flight once more. And at the end of it all, Coco could enjoy the fruits of her labor by soaring through the sky using a spell that she created to pass the exam. Witch Hat highlights not only the pricelessness of magic as a skill, but also the fleeting gratification that comes with the process of learning. It's a feeling that you usually only feel briefly at the onset of your journey, since the moment you become familiar with what being skilled truly means, the rift of comparison will rip you away from the passion you initially carried. Coco's present state signifies the blissful ignorance that exists before the storm of comparison, and while she may have started her journey seeing the darkest horrors of magic, she was still able to admire its elegance through Qifrey's guidance, because as much as magic can be used to harm, it can also be used to help. I had mentioned previously that if magic were to become real, that would likely adopt Witch Hat's sophisticated system, but this doesn't exclusively apply to how it would operate from a logical perspective. Due to humanity's sinister nature, the structure of secrecy put into place by the witches would also need to be adopted, as unrestrained freedom will almost always lead back to anarchy in some form. It's just as Qifrey said, when humans are given the power to do anything, anything is what they will do, which is perfectly exemplified through Witch Hat's difficult past with magic. On one side of the coin, there are those who seek to abuse magic's potential, dabbling in what would become known as forbidden magic. Included in this subset of taboos are spells used directly on the human body, so things like transformations, age alterations, mental manipulation, and even healing, alongside anything else that could potentially be used to harm others. Of course, as you've probably figured out, there's one singular exception to this rule, and that is the use of memory erasing spells to keep magic's techniques hidden. But other than this, every other criteria falls down to the letter. From the petrification spell that Coco accidentally casted to, more notably, the alternate dimension spell that entrapped all of Qifrey's apprentices, the types of magic that these forbidden mages have in their arsenals are extremely powerful, and it's terrifying to think that we've only scratched the surface of how depraved these spells can actually get. But as much as magic is capable of destruction, it is equally able to create and protect. Take Orugio's Glowstone Path for example. Despite being a high-class mage, this simple spell ended up having the greatest impact on everyday people, inspiring wonder and bringing joy to all those who stepped on it. In fact, this was one of the main reasons that Coco fell in love with magic in the first place, making her feel as if she was connected to something that seemed so far from her reach. Magic can be wielded to save others, whether that be the levitation spell that Coco used to save Kustas, or Qifrey's water dragon summon that eviscerated the dragon holding his apprentices captive. Finally, magic is able to bring happiness to even the most mundane tasks of life, like when Coco was learning to use her acquired spells to cook carapace yams. Again and again, she would have to modify the signs of her rune to properly cook the yams, providing her the excitement of success as she enjoyed the meal that she cooked through her diligent efforts. It is then through these examples that demonstrates the undying will of those who seek to shield magic's integrity, generating a realistic depiction of the delicate balance that comprises a magical world. When considering both the pure and corrupt applications of magic, it's easy to see how Witch Hat Atelier's thorough attention to detail makes magic feel special and complex. The anime makes us realize that there's more to this phenomenon than flashy explosions, and that there is beauty in the simple spells that nobody really thinks about. At the end of the day, magic is a double-edged sword that can either harm or benefit humanity. It has logic and a deep system that takes years to master, and while it may be something that everyone can use, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone should be able to use it. A burden that is flawlessly conveyed through Witch Hat Atelier's masterful way of storytelling.